And we are recording. And we are here with Professor Sabrina Starnaman from the University of Texas at Dallas. And we are going to talk about Frankenstein. In your UTD article, where I found information online, you were touching on the ethics of the novel, beside it simply being a simple ghost story. What are some of the ethical issues that you really find with this book?
Well, I think that this book really takes up a lot of the significant questions of the late 18th and 19th century, like, who can control, like, the forces of power, who can play God. I think it's pretty central to the book is this idea that just because we have a technology doesn't necessarily mean we should use it without any consideration of the outcomes. It is definitely a book about taking responsibility for our actions, right? There's the ethical question of, like, should Victor do what he does? And then there's the ethical question of, like, what does he do once he's, brought the creature to life? So I think that's incredibly important. I think that there are also some larger, or in the background, some interesting questions about motherhood in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And while that may not be technically an ethical question, I think it's definitely a social and a human question about respect for parenting, right? Respect for the nurturing of the creatures that we bring into the world. So, and if you don't mind if I riff a little bit on context, I would love to talk.
You are fine to riff.
Thanks. So the time in which this book was written is very different than the time we are living in now.
Right.
And so when Mary Shelley wrote this, death was not something that was far away. Okay, we live in a world in which death often happens in a hospital. Oftentimes people don't see their family members or their friends when they've died. The care of the body takes place in funeral homes by licensed funeral directors. But that was not the case in the days in which Mary Shelley lived. And so in Mary Shelley's life, there was an awful lot of death. Death was around her across the board, right? And her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was extremely famous in her own right, died when Mary Shelley was 10 days old. And then when Mary was writing this book in her teens, she had already given birth to and lost one baby. And she was, actually, this is mind-blowing to me. She wrote this book while she had a baby, an infant, there with them in Switzerland. And so, and she was always worried about the death of her child. And she went on to lose a number of children.
Oh, yeah.
And her husband very young.
Right.
So I think that there is a real, a real concern with death in this book that may not always come through to the modern reader because we just don't see it. So, right, like, we don't live in a world in which women may have 8 babies and 5 of them die, or that maternal death is so common. It's too common in America, but it was much more common then. So I think that is in the background of this book, and I think it leads into some of the ethical questions of creation and responsibility.
No doubt that even came through in some of her and Percy's letters that they wrote, where they talked about the death of their children, and she even named one of their children is named William, who's in the 1831 edition.
Yes, named after her dad,
mm-hmm.
also a famous thinker, and maybe your students already know all this, but he had really kind of spurned them And so she named him William to get back in his good graces. Unfortunately, all her dad seemed to want was money from Percy Shelley.
That is true.
So I'm going to plug a book in case you have students out there who are super interested in this. I don't know if you guys have read this book, Romantic Outlaws, Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley, or The Extraordinary Lives of Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley. It's a biography by Charlotte Gordon. And it is so readable. And it's really fascinating just to see how much of an impact Mary Shelley's dead mother had on her and on Percy Shelley. So do you want me to just keep talking from your questions, or do you want to ask?
Unless Maggie wanted to.
No, that's fine.
No, because I know I sent you our questions, so.
Yeah, I think some of mine are mixed in there. So
yeah, so you're free to take off on the questions that we sent you.
Feel free to interrupt me if you have more thoughts.
Sure.
One of the things that I think is, one question we might have is, why is this book still so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's more than 200 years old, and why is it still so relevant? I think we talked about some of the ethical issues, and in fact, if you do a survey of both pop culture and of academic and scientific publications, the Frankenstein as a motif comes up over and over and over again. Like, scientists talk about Frankenstein in a lot of different ways, which I think is interesting. But one of the things that is kind of spectacular about this book is that it can be read from a psychological perspective. It can be read through a feminist lens. It can be read as social metaphor. It can be read as political critique. And I think that's what a lot of great books do, is that we can sort of come at them from these different perspectives. And I think that's what's kept it going. And I think one of the issues in this book that is still something that we wrestle with even today is the split between the sciences and the humanities, right? And we have Victor representing science, and we have Henry representing like poetry and the humanities. Right. And this gets to that ethical issue that science or progress without, reflection, ethical considerations, becomes a dangerous and maybe a dangerous project, and maybe a project that is devoid of a kind of larger social commitment. And so I think that's one of the things that I am struck by about this book when I teach it. I teach a class that's just 200 years of Frankenstein, and we read a whole bunch of other books that take up Frankenstein. And maybe at the end I'll plug some of them, because your students might find some of them kind of interesting.
So the entire semester is Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Oh man, sign me up.
Yeah, it's great. We read all different. We read we read comics, we read novels, we read short stories. So, yeah.
Frankenstein in Baghdad.
Yeah, that's a great book. Yeah, that's a great Sadawi. That's a great book. Well, then I'll just make my pitch right now. Also, let me see if I can find it. Oh, I should have brought it out. Victor the author, who's an amazing author, Victor Laval, wrote a comic called Destroyer, which is amazing, and it takes on race in America. And in it, Victor Frankenstein's creature is in it, and there's an evil government agency, and there's a nanotech scientist whose son has been killed by the police, and so it's a pretty amazing comic book, and we end the semester with it. It's kind of one of those mic drop books.
Very cool.
So we have a lot of STEM focused kids in our dual credit class. So what parts, is there like a certain part or something you think that they should focus on or try and take out from those ethical standpoints?
Well, that's a good question. So I have been here holding this. This is the copy I teach from, which is, it is a special edition from MIT.
Okay.
And it is annotated for scientists, engineers, and creators of all kinds.
Okay.
So all the annotations are there for science students. And that even has some really great little essays at the back about science.
Is that based off the 1818 or 1831?
I think it's the 1818, actually.
Okay.
I was looking to see if I could find it, where it says, and I couldn't find it. Probably if I spent more time, I could find it. Yeah, and like it has like essays by like Cory Doctorow and Elizabeth Bear, who are science fiction writers, and then like philosophers of science and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, this is the version we read. I think most importantly is to not become single focused like Victor, right? He becomes sort of obsessed, and while that kind of mad scientist single focus is really romantic, it's a romantic image, it's important to not lose perspective. And then I think also this idea that science really doesn't happen very often like it happens in here. It's not a single person toiling away in their laboratory. Science is really a community effort. And when you have a community effort, hopefully you have people of different perspectives who come in and say, but what about this and what about that? And so, make sure not to just talk to scientists, right? Humanities people need to talk to scientists, and scientists need to talk to humanities people to try to get some. And one of the things that the humanists are good at is imagining what possible outcomes might be. And we need that. I mean, science fiction is the marriage of science and humanistic critique, and scientists need that too.
Awesome. Let me ask you a question, and this is one that I emailed to you, and it's one that the students bring up constantly, and it's, once again, it's out of the 1831 version with 24 chapters. At the end of chapter 4, Victor is so excited. He's got this God complex that, this new species is going to bless me as its creator. And then opening part of chapter 5, within 2 paragraphs, he's disgusted by the entire thing. What happened in the break between chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5?
Yeah, so I'm not going to do a close reading of that, but I will speak to it in a two parts. First of all, I want to answer your question, what's your favorite part of the text? Because my favorite part of the text is the psychological, the psychological complexity. And so, and that's my answer also for what has happened, right? Is that
fair enough?
Mary Shelley does an amazing job of understanding how the human psyche works, which is still baffling that she did this in her youth. But I think, Victor's young, and he has all this hubris, right? And he is completely in love with his own, his own accomplishments. And this is really, really dangerous. If there's anything we learn as we grow older, it's that when we think we're all that, we are brought down a peg or two. And so I think that's part of it, is the danger of hubris. It is also a kind of ableist critique, perhaps, is that Victor has as his model of ideal this notion that man should look a certain way, right? They should have 4 arms and 10 toes and 10 fingers. And of course, Victor's creature has those things, but that they should also be attractive and, of a normal size. And he thinks he's creating this like Superman, the super giant, perfect man. But he creates something that's sort of cobbled together from pieces. And it's you know, his expectations, his belief about what being a man means is then not, once life has like breathed into this creature, he is disgusted by it. And I think that is his limitation to see the humanity in all people.
Mm.
I don't know, what do you think?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think there's also a little bit of that aspect that after 2 years of looking at this being on the table, you almost wonder, you know, it's that, oh my God, what have I done moment where these were my intentions. I never really expected them to actually come true.
Right. Or if they were going to come true, somehow they were going to come true at some imaginary image of in his mind.
You have this lovely expectations you have set for yourself, and then the reality is literally staring you in the face.
Yeah. And the thing is that he's created the most wise and tender and the most amazing creature who is so capable of so much and learning so much. And he can't see it because he's just so horrified with the reality of it. And so circling back around to my, like, what's my favorite part of this book is that it's not just how awesome the monster is, it's also how Victor's like emotional range, and you know, it's the two of them, that moment where the two of them are talking on the glacier.
That's my favorite part.
Right. I mean, I like printed out some slides from when I talk about Frankenstein. When the creature says, "I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind? You, my creator, would tear me to pieces and triumph. Yep. Remember that and tell me why I should pity a man more than he pities me. Let a man live with me in the interchange of kindness, and instead of injury, I would bestow every benefit upon him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance." I mean, that's just amazing.
Exactly. And the first time they talk in chapter 10, you know, devil, dare you approach me? And I mean, it's amazing.
I mean, and it's amazing too, because like the creature is a better man.
Yeah.
The creature is a better person than Victor.
He even says, I expected this reception. You know, all men hate the wretched, and here I am. You made me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating. Yes. So that's my favorite part, is the psychological complexity and nuance that she brings to this. Also, the writing is really good.
It is.
Just can turn an incredibly beautiful phrase. So if you have like juniors and seniors, you tell them they better get busy. Who was their age when she wrote this?
That is true. That is true. So you brought up the word monster. Who is the monster?
Oh, well, of course, I think Victor Frankenstein is the monster. But we have been so acculturated to thinking of the creature as the monster that, you know, I don't know if you guys have seen the meme that's like the last page of Frankenstein, except it's in handwritten. It says like, and then the creature said, "You're going to call me a monster. That's just fine," or something like that. Like, you know, it's the creature's destiny is to be called a monster, even though he's not. And Victor will never be called that by the people in his world, even though I agree he is. So you also asked if I thought that there were things that were relevant in this book to this very strange moment we're living in.
COVID, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. And I think that there are. I think that the very heart of this book is our responsibility to each other. And that when we are not responsible to each other and care for each other, that things fall apart. I think that this is a book that also shows us that fear makes us small people, right? Fear makes us small and mean. And because Victor becomes small and fearful when he, casts his eyes upon his creation. Um, and I think we all know that being the bigger person is like, it's really a challenge. And so one of the things that's so amazing in this book is that the creature is the bigger person, has the bigger heart, has the more expansive. I mean, he's vengeful and he's mad and all those things. It's reasonable, but he also doesn't necessarily tear Victor limb from limb. And so he shows a lot of restraint. And so like, there is this mutuality about society. And when we don't honor that, things break down. And I think that's why I think it's interesting. And this is part of the reason why this book then gets reimagined in Frankenstein in Baghdad, or Victor Laval's Destroyer, or these themes get taken up over and over again. And I think they're really, that these writers know how relevant this theme is. I mean,
What are some of your favorite modern cultural references? Like Young Frankenstein, or
oh, that's a good question. I'm a Penny Dreadful fan. And I don't know if you've watched Penny Dreadful.
yeah,
But the man, so you've got all kinds of sort of Victorian characters from all of these movies or all of these texts all together in London. So there's a werewolf, and there's Victor Frankenstein, and there's the creature, and there's a African explorer, and there's a witch, and it's all based on some of the ideas of the Penny Dreadful stage plays. And the creature in the show is just, he is angry, but he just like the creature in the book, he is so sensitive, and he is rejected, and yet he is so insightful, and he is a fleshed out character in a way that we don't necessarily see in the book. So I'm gonna go right to a television serial and on cable and tell you that's my favorite.
I have not watched it yet, but you're like the second or third person in the last month to tell me.
It's great. It's really great. And it's beautiful, and in all of its, in its grimness and its dirtiness and its darkness, not unlike the book.
true. And I've watched an umpteen number of movie interpretations, and I can only find one that's actually even close to the book.
It's not the 1994 one, is it? With Kenneth Branagh and
No, that's god awful.
That's god. Okay, good.
No, it's the one from the Hallmark Channel.
Wow.
With
seen that.
William Hurt.
Oh, you know what? This
William
reminds
Hurt
me.
is Professor Waldman.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to look at that. I have not seen all of the stage play where Victor and the creature trade places.
Right.
With Benedict Cumberbatch and the guy from Elementary.
Yeah, I have not seen that either.
That's supposed to be good. I think I've seen excerpts from it, but I think it's London National Theatre. So,
Yeah,
worth seeing.
They did that at the Angelica a couple of years ago.
Yes, yeah. In fact, they did it the semester I was teaching the class, but they were showing it while my class was going on, so I couldn't go.
Field trip.
Yeah, that's right. So I definitely gave my students extra credit if they went to go see it.
What are some of the, do you believe are some of the romantic qualities from the novel, specifically to the romantics, that you think Mary really highlights that our students would enjoy?
So, I read this question and I thought, I bet you two are better at answering this question than I am. Because in academia, you get real specific about what you teach. And so I'm actually an Americanist, but I also teach science fiction and fantasy and women's lit. And so Frankenstein fit my areas of expertise, with the exception of being British. So, so I'm no expert on the romantics. From my limited understanding of knowledge of the romantics, what I would say is a quest to understand human existence. And that is absolutely important. I would also say the importance of natural landscapes, in a sense, right? The idea that the natural world and the human experience are somehow mutually informing, because there's all these images in this book in which it's not just Victor, it's Victor on this island in a storm or on the glacier with the creature. And so I think that she is drawing on that kind of, some of that more, I don't know, is that pastoral kind of imagery?
No doubt.
To sort of act as a mirror for what's happening inside of the characters. And
those happen to be two of the significant ones that I know we both talk about.
Oh, great. Okay, good.
Anytime these characters are stressed, the next chapter usually has them rejuvenated somehow in nature, floating on a lake or, sitting on the banks, whatever.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think it's really clear that this is a, and I mean, a romantic. I mean, also this idea that, there's a kind of romantic, an idea that comes out of Romanticism as well, of the kind of the individual, right? The individual search for understanding themselves and understanding the universe. And I mean, maybe that's just simply universal, but it seems to me like it's something the Romantic poets really, they were also introspective. And so I think that maybe Mary's making a bit of a critique of that, that man looking inside by himself doesn't end well. We have to make our relationships. We have to acknowledge our relationships. We have to move forward thinking about other people. So, I mean, she was so well educated. And
no doubt.
So she knew what she was doing. And if she was making a critique, she knew it. That's what I think.
I agree with you 1,000%. And I agree with you as far as the, introspection and self-reflection. You can see that through some of the lines that the monster speaks. Who am I? It's very existential.
Absolutely. And I think this speaks to alienation, right? That society alienates and abuses anyone it sees as different from its ideal or its expected. And so, and this is where we can do also a queer reading of the book, is that this idea that the creature is alienated and most assuredly by no fault of his own, and has to go out into the world and suffer abuses from not just his creator, but strangers. And then somehow finds in those experiences a way to grow as a human being.
So that kind of leads into one of the questions I've always had about Frankenstein is she writes this, she's with Lord Byron, she's with Percy Shelley, she's making these big critiques kind of on how much do you think was a criticism of them or maybe some superficial stuff? How much do you think they were inspiring her as she was in the next room jotting down ideas?
So, this is really like complicated and super
Yeah.
and which is why I recommend this book, because
Okay.
you want to know, like, she talks a lot about, well, the relationship. So she is in Switzerland with her with Percy Shelley, who's her partner,
Right.
and Lord Byron and Dr. Polidori, but her stepsister is also there, Claire Claremont.
Right.
And Claire is having an affair with Byron at the same time. And, you know, and like Percy Shelley is married to another woman in England at the same time. And
Who's pregnant?
Who's pregnant. So, I mean, it's interesting because I can't help but think that, I mean, we have plenty of evidence that Claire Claremont was just besotted with Lord Byron and was happy to get whatever attention from him she could. But I think Mary was a little less, I mean, she was probably, it sounds to me like she was enamored, but she was still able to sort of have a little critical distance. And, you know, she's there and she's got this baby and, you know, like, she's obligated to take care of her baby. I mean, she had a nurse, but like, still, she's got to nurse the baby and take care of the baby. I think there's got to be a way in which these men did not completely seem golden, right? That she could maybe see some of their tarnish. And Lord Byron, while I have always liked his poetry, wasn't a great guy. And in fact, took the child that he and Claire Claremont had away from her and then eventually put it as a little girl, put her in a really abusive convent school that was like notorious. And then the child died, you know, like Allegra. And so, and of course that's in the future. Like, she's writing this book and at least when she's writing it in 1816, it's in the future. So she doesn't know what's going to happen. But I think you're right. I think you're right that there's a way in which she's making a critique of the kind of hubris these men had. I mean, Lord Byron was incredibly rich. Like, he could just do whatever he wanted.
Oh yeah.
And you know, wherever they went, it was a scandal, right? They were like a national scandal in England because of like the being together out of wedlock and, you know, going around with the stepsister and Mary and so yeah, I think that she put a little of the hubris she saw up close. And to be quite honest, her dad was a really complicated guy, very, very, very bright, very well respected. But you know, he was pretty flawed too.
That's true.
So I don't know. What are your favorite parts of this book?
Aggie?
Honestly, I'm more fascinated with like her story and her writing it almost sometimes. Like, I do love the book and I love reading it, but the parts I start focusing in on are like that, or like what parts are kind of influenced by Lord Byron, who she knew, and like her upbringing and how does it, I guess the psychological, kind of like what you were saying, but kind of her as she's writing this.
Yeah. Well, this biography is also on Audible. It's a great listen.
I'm going to put that down.
If you're looking for something for this week.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which is my favorite. I know a lot of the autobiography, and once you do, you see the influence in there. You know, with the 1831, you look at the opening letter, you look at the closing letter, they're 9 months apart. So like you said earlier, birth is definitely, motherhood is a significant and conscious theme in the autobiography. It is fascinating. I still think the part that intrigues me the most is when in chapter 10 of our version, Victor and his creation meet face to face for that first time. And it's hard for the students to understand when they first read it, because I constantly tell them, don't forget, this is still being told to us through Robert Walton,
Yeah.
who's being dictated to, and he's writing it all down. So we're not 100% sure if that dialogue is accurate, but take it for what it is. But that dialogue exchange back and forth is really powerful.
It's so powerful. I have to say that I didn't know when I designed this class that it was going to be the class that the students and I all agree we have the most interesting discussions.
Oh, no doubt.
I mean, like, what does it mean to be a person? You know, like, what is personhood, right? This is the kind of class in which the conversations, we have 3 hours for our class.
Oh, wow.
And so our conversations go really deep, and we have ample time to develop them. And the other books, I'm going to see if I can really quickly, there's another, oh yeah, I got another book for you, which is a great, sorry, it's a professional hazard to end up with like all these books. Strange Bodies by Marcel Thoreau.
Oh yeah, I've read that.
That's it's another great Frankenstein story, you know, about what does it mean to be a human? What is the human condition? And explore as well, like nurture versus nature, right? Like, how does the creature grow so beautifully despite all of the mistreatment? Like, is he inherently good? Like, I mean, he's angry. I mean, he's vengeful. He's, you know, he does horrible things too, which is also a really beautiful thing for us to think about.
Right.
Is like, what does it mean to have rage? And, you know, like, is it understandable sometimes?
No doubt.
You know, kind of very human questions.
And we've also at times veered into, you know, the modern eugenics movement.
Yes. Oh yeah. Do tell. Like what, like how do you talk about it?
Well, when Victor is creating his being, somehow, I don't know if I bring it up or a student brings it up, but regardless, we end up talking about the ability to custom order your children and design. You know, you can hire a geneticist right now to determine the gender, the hair color, the eye color, some of the physical traits. But then the question is, what are the ethics on, you know, psychological traits?
Ah, interesting.
And, you know, that usually scares the life out of a lot of them.
Yeah. I mean, and also, I mean, there's eugenics and like this kind of science is also really interesting to me. One of the books I teach during this semester is called Geek Love by Catherine Dunn. I don't know if either of you read it. It's from the 80s. Sorry, I'm doing that thing again where I'm looking for the book on my shelf. Anyway, it is a book about a family that owns a freak show, and the dad is an amateur chemist, and he marries this like woman who's like an acrobat performer, and they decided instead of hiring freaks, they're going to make their own.
Oh wow.
And so he gives his wife all these chemicals, and they have all these children, some of whom survive and some don't. And so they have a set of Siamese twins. They have a boy who has flippers for arms and legs. And they all work together in this freak show. And it's amazing. And they, of course, see themselves as gifted, right? Their parents raised them to see themselves as special, and that everybody who's not like them is just normal, and that's too bad for them. And it's a fascinating book. It is a little challenging because it is hard for people to accept that parents would do this to their kids. But the way the parents see it, the children are all special, and they all have a built-in way to make money. Like, and the book is told through the least special of the children, who is a albino dwarf hunchback, and she is the barker because she's not special enough. So her dad teaches her how to use her voice, and so it's a great book. and wrestles with those questions of like, what if, how much choice should we have? Yeah.
You're gonna have to write that one down. Geek love.
Geek love. Yeah, it's a good one. It's also really beautifully written. I mean, and and also this idea of like, how, what do we need to how do we need to change to be able to love all of the creatures on the earth, right? Like, not just the pretty ones.
Good point.
Which I think is central, to Frankenstein.
No
So
doubt about it.
great. So, and how do your students seem to like Frankenstein? I actually just had a student who came to me who graduated from one of the prep schools here in Dallas. And he asked if he could take my class, even though he didn't yet have the prerequisites, because he read Frankenstein in high school and he loved it so much.
Who is the student?
I can't remember his name, Michael something. I'm trying to think. I don't think he went to Bishop Lynch, but I think he went to another one. But it was so nice. We had a Zoom call, where I interviewed him, because I was like, I don't usually let freshmen take my class. But he seemed very mature and really committed. And so, but I was really thrilled to see that, because it's not an easy book to read, like I'm super impressed that high school students are really like getting into the depth of the book. I mean, of course they can,
Yeah. They love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so human. So it just thrills me to hear that students are coming out of high school and they get it and they like it.
I think in my classes, they like talking about the ethics. They like doing the debates and the discussions that it kind of brings up.
Yeah. I mean, there's a strong argument about how we need progress. We need to push science forward. Where would we be if we didn't?
Exactly. There's no doubt about that. And yet, there's always got to be the cautionary aspect.
That's right. And so, how do we find the middle way? There's in this book, there's an article about the Manhattan Project,
right,
and the creation of the atom bomb. And, it's clear that those scientists, some of them had a lot of concerns as they were moving forward, but there was also a lot of excitement about what they were, the new science that they were engaging with. But then they all were kind of wrecked afterwards, after they saw the destruction. And so, I don't know. It's kind of amazing that in the early 19th century, she was able to really understand those questions.
No doubt about it. Like you said, she was a heightened intellectual, had intellectuals in her house, not only from her parents, friends, and poets of the day. I mean, Coleridge is in the house reciting poetry, and Fuseli's there with his paintings, and really more after her mother, but nonetheless. Yeah,
it's so amazing. And then, they were really interested in science, and this idea that, at least for like the upper classes and people with a certain amount of privilege, you could go and watch, this kind of science where they were, shooting electricity through dead bodies in these theaters, these kind of operating theaters. And that's interesting, right? And the fact that body snatching was such a common practice of the day, right? And this idea that body snatching to us sounds unbelievably morbid and crazy, but that it was such a common practice, it probably was common knowledge. Like, right? You were worried that when you're, if you buried someone in your family, that they were going to get dug up and used at a medical school or whatever. Like, I don't know. I love, part of what's so wonderful about literature is trying to imagine what it would be like to live and see the world through the eyes of someone in the past.
It's a good point. Really good.
So,
In that post-French Revolution era.
yeah. I totally, again, I'm going to hawk this biography because it talks all about Mary Wollstonecraft. I learned more about the French Revolution from this book than I had known about it before. Maggie, do you have a question?
Oh, I think you've kind of wrapped up the big questions I had about it. I do want to ask you, so you said freshmen don't usually take your class. What levels usually do?
My class is usually for juniors and seniors. And to be honest, we get into some pretty intense topics. Most of my classes engage with critical race and gender, sexuality, politics, and that sort of thing. And so and to be honest, the class I teach is so popular, it's 90 students. And so it's packed. And in fact, it fills up right away, like right away. And
Okay.
so it's a big class where everybody has to really follow a lot of sort of social norms in the classroom for us to be able to have 90 people in a largely discussion-based class.
For 3 hours, right?
For 3 hours.
Yeah.
On Monday night until 10 o'clock at night.
That's
So yeah, but I mean, I teach science fiction and fantasy every Monday night, every semester. So right now I'm teaching a class on urban fantasy. And in the spring, I taught a class on the hero's journey. And
sweet.
in spring of next year, I'm teaching a class called The Weird, which is all about weird fiction. Like we start with Lovecraft and we go all the way up to all sorts of present day new weird, and then even the neo-Lovecraftian writers. So yeah, it's a labor of love. I really enjoy teaching that class. So.
Excellent.
So
well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, unfortunately, I have another Zoom coming up in just a few moments.
Yep.
But
this is the new world we live in.
It is. Professor Starnaman, we greatly appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate your insight and definitely making our department chair's credit card get to work on Amazon soon, because we've got a few books we've got to tell her to order. Romantic Outlaws, for sure.
That's a really good one. And so thank you so much for having me. I have been so happy to see that that working on Frankenstein has something that has a broad reach and people really want to hear about it. And then I hope your students read this and see this and think, I can't wait to take lit classes in college.
There you go.
We're waiting for you.
Greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Nice to meet you. Take care.
Thank you.
You as well. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.